Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Brett hunched over his desk, a red pen poised above a stack of history essays. The clock on the wall ticked past 11 p.m., another Friday night sacrifice to his job. He reached for his coffee mug, grimacing at the cold remnants inside. As he moved his arm, his elbow caught the edge of Marissa's purse, sending its contents scattering across the already cluttered surface. "Damn it," he muttered, setting down his pen to gather the fallen items. As he swept his hand under the desk, his fingers brushed against something plastic. Expecting a pin or perhaps one of Marissa's countless hair ties, he pulled it out, only to find himself staring at a white stick with two pink lines clearly visible in a small window. Brett's mind went blank for a moment before kicking into overdrive. A pregnancy test. A positive pregnancy test. He sat back in his chair, still clutching the test in his hand. Memories flooded in. The hopeful beginnings of IVF treatments, the crushing disappointments, Marissa's silent tears, and his own carefully concealed grief. 3 times they had tried. 3 times they had failed. The last attempt had nearly broken them, both financially and emotionally. Brett's eyes darted toward Marissa's purse. Before he could talk himself out of it, he reached in and rifled through its contents more thoroughly. Tucked into her wallet, behind her driver's license, he found it. An ultrasound image dated just 2 days prior. His hands shook as he held the grainy black and white photo. A tiny shape. A life. Their miracle. Brett's eyes stung with unshed tears. After everything, it had finally happened. Marissa must have been planning to surprise him. Well, 2 could play at that game. A plan began forming in his mind. He would wake up early, make Marissa's favorite blueberry pancakes, maybe even pick up some flowers from that little shop on the corner. They would celebrate properly, make up for lost time. As Brett crawled into bed beside his sleeping wife, he felt lighter than he had in years. Their dream was finally coming true. Saturday morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the curtains. Brett eased out of bed, careful not to wake Marissa. He padded downstairs, his mind already on pancake batter and the perfect cup of coffee. As he passed their home office, he heard Marissa's voice, low and urgent. Brett paused. She must have woken up without him noticing. "I do not know what to do, Jen," Marissa was saying. Brett recognized her sister's name. "I cannot keep lying to him." Brett's hand froze on the doorknob. "No, I have not told Brett yet," Marissa continued, her voice tight with anxiety. "How can I? You know how desperate he has been for a baby. If he finds out it is Nelson's," the world tilted sideways. Brett stumbled back from the door, his mind reeling. Nelson Haley, the drama teacher. Charismatic, handsome Nelson with his easy smile and effortless charm. I know, Marissa's voice drifted through the door. "I have to end things with Nelson, but you should see the way Brett looks at me now. He is so happy, Jen. I cannot take that away from him." Brett found himself in the kitchen, not entirely sure how he had gotten there. The ingredients for pancakes sat accusingly on the counter. Mechanically, he began putting them away, his movements wooden and detached. His wife was pregnant, but not with his child. With Nelson's child, and she had planned to pass it off as his own. An egg slipped from Brett's numb fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. He stared at the yellow yolk spreading across the tile. How fitting. His life lay in pieces at his feet. Monday morning arrived with cruel inevitability. Brett moved through his routine in a daze, barely tasting his breakfast, hardly hearing Marissa's cheerful chatter about her plans for the day. The halls of Jefferson High School buzzed with the usual cacophony of slamming lockers and adolescent voices. Brett nodded mechanically at passing students and colleagues, all the while scanning the crowd. There, at the end of the hallway, stood Nelson Haley, holding court, surrounded by a group of adoring drama students, gesturing animatedly, no doubt regaling them with tales of his latest theatrical triumph. Brett's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wanted nothing more than to march down that hallway and introduce Nelson's face to the nearest locker door, repeatedly. But no, not here. Not now. There was too much at stake. Forcing himself to turn away, Brett retreated to the relative safety of his classroom. He had a free period first thing, time enough to think. To plan. The school's ancient desktop computer wheezed to life as Brett's fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for information on paternity laws and father's rights. But the deeper he dug, the more his stomach churned. Without proof of paternity, he had no legal claim to the child. Marissa could simply list him as the father on the birth certificate. Even if he later proved he was not the biological parent, the courts tended to favor the mother in custody disputes. His eyes burned as he stared at the screen. He had always played by the rules, done the right thing. And where had it gotten him? Cuckolded, facing the loss of a child that was never his to begin with. A notification popped up on the screen, a reminder from their joint bank account. Brett clicked it absently, then froze. Large withdrawals. Thousands of dollars siphoned off over the past 3 months. Right around the time Marissa must have gotten pregnant. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Money for a secret abortion, or a nest egg to run away with Nelson. Brett's mind raced. He needed more information, more evidence. He could not confront Marissa, not yet. Not until he had an ironclad plan. The bell rang, startling Brett from his thoughts. Students began filing in, chattering and laughing. Brett plastered on a smile, shoving down the bile rising in his throat. "All right, everyone," he called out, his voice steadier than he felt. "Let's pick up where we left off last class. Who can tell me about the economic factors leading to the Civil War?" As Brett launched into his lecture, a part of his mind continued to churn. He had trusted Marissa implicitly, never questioned her faithfulness. Now, he realized that trust had been his downfall. Well, no more. Brett Hess was done being the naive Boy Scout. It was time to fight fire with fire. Brett stood in the electronics aisle of the local big box store, eyeing the array of security cameras with feigned interest. He had done his research. He knew exactly which model he needed, but he had to play the part. "Can I help you find anything, sir?" A chipper sales associate materialized at his elbow. Brett forced a smile. "Just looking at home security systems. My wife is pregnant, you know. Cannot be too careful these days." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. His wife, pregnant with another man's child. 20 minutes later, Brett left the store with a state-of-the-art security system. Cameras small enough to hide in plain sight, with crystal-clear audio pickup. Perfect for catching adulterous wives in the act. Installing the cameras was almost too easy. Marissa never questioned his sudden interest in home security. She was too preoccupied with her own secrets. The first day yielded nothing of interest. Marissa went about her usual routine, made a few work calls, watched some mindless reality TV. Brett began to think he had overreacted, that maybe he had misheard that damning phone conversation. Then, on day 2, the cameras struck gold. Marissa curled up on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, her phone pressed to her ear. Her best friend Hope's voice crackled through the speakers. "Still cannot believe you were pregnant," Hope said. "How are you feeling?" Marissa sighed, taking a long sip of wine. "Honestly, terrified, guilty, excited. It is all mixed up. Have you told Brett yet?" "No," Marissa's voice was barely above a whisper. I cannot. You know how much he wants this baby. If Brett had not known before, he did now." "Nelson." Brett's hands clenched into fists, nails biting into his palms as he forced himself to keep watching. "You have to tell him, Ray," Hope urged. "The longer you wait, the worse it will be." I know, Marissa sighed. "It is just, you should see the way he looks at me now, like I have given him the moon. How can I take that away from him?" The conversation devolved into nervous hand-wringing and endless rationalizations. Brett tuned it out, his mind already racing ahead to his next move. He had proof now. Undeniable evidence of Marissa's infidelity. But it was not enough. Not nearly enough. Brett's fingers flew across his keyboard, muscle memory taking over as he hacked into Marissa's email account. It was not difficult. She still used the same password for everything. Their anniversary date. The irony was not lost on him. What he found made his blood run cold. Correspondence with an online lender, one with a reputation for being less than ethical. Loan applications filled with blatantly falsified information. This was more than infidelity. This was fraud. Criminal activity that could land them both in serious trouble. Brett's mind churned, weighing his options. A part of him wanted to confront Marissa immediately, demand answers, force a confession. But the more rational part of his brain knew better. He needed to wait, to gather more evidence, to build an airtight case. With trembling hands, Brett composed an anonymous tip to the bank and local authorities, detailing the financial irregularities he had uncovered. It felt like a betrayal, but he reminded himself, Marissa had betrayed him first. Now he was just protecting himself. The next day at school, a staff meeting was called. The principal's face was grim as she addressed the assembled faculty. "As some of you may have heard, the state has announced significant budget cuts for the coming year," she began. "I am afraid this means we will be facing some difficult decisions in the coming months. Layoffs may be necessary." A ripple of unease spread through the room. Brett's eyes darted to Nelson, noting the sudden paleness of the other man's face. Good. Let him sweat a little. As the meeting dispersed, Brett found himself cornered by Nelson. The drama teacher's usual easy charm seemed strained, his smile a touch too wide. Hey, Brett. I hear congratulations are in order, Nelson said, clapping him on the shoulder. Marissa must be over the moon. It took every ounce of Brett's self-control not to deck the man right there in the hallway. Instead, he forced a smile. Thanks, Nelson. We are both thrilled. Nelson's eyes flickered, a hint of guilt crossing his features. Listen, he continued, shifting on his feet. I was thinking the drama club could really use a faculty advisor. Someone to help out with the administrative side of things. Would you be interested? Brett's mind whirled. This could be an opportunity, a chance to get closer, to gather more information. You know what? Brett said, nodding. That sounds great. I would be happy to help out. Nelson's smile widened, relief washing over his face. As the other man chatted excitedly about upcoming productions, Brett nodded along, all the while imagining 1,000 painful ways to make him suffer. The trap was set. Now, all Brett had to do was wait for his prey to stumble into it. The dining room was bathed in soft candlelight, the table set with their best china. Brett had outdone himself. A 3-course meal, Marissa's favorites. The perfect setting for a celebration. Marissa picked at her food, tension radiating from every line of her body. Brett watched her, waiting. He had given her plenty of opportunities to come clean over the past week. Now, it seemed she had finally worked up the courage. Brett, she began, setting down her fork. I have something to tell you. He arranged his features into a mask of concern. What is it, sweetheart? Is everything okay? Marissa took a deep breath. I am pregnant. Brett let his fork clatter onto the plate, widening his eyes in what he hoped looked like stunned joy. What? Are you serious? He stood, pulling Marissa into an embrace. Over her shoulder, his eyes were cold and calculating. Oh my God, this is amazing, Brett exclaimed, his voice thick with false emotion. When did you find out? How far along are you? He watched carefully as Marissa stumbled through her responses, noting every nervous glance, every hesitation. She was a terrible liar. Really? How had he never noticed before? I cannot believe it, Brett murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. After everything we have been through, it is finally happening. Marissa's smile was watery, guilt clouding her eyes. I know. It is a miracle. A miracle. Brett wanted to laugh, or maybe scream. Instead, he held his wife close, his mind already racing ahead to the next phase of his plan. So, he said, pulling back to look at her, when did this miracle happen, exactly? I mean, we have not exactly been trying lately. What with all the stress from the failed IVF attempts? Marissa's eyes darted away. Oh, you know, it must have been that night after Sarah's wedding. Remember? We both had a bit too much champagne. Brett remembered. He also remembered that Sarah's wedding had been nearly 4 months ago. If Marissa was only now announcing her pregnancy, the timing did not quite add up. But he simply smiled, nodding along. Of course. How could I forget? It was a magical night. Marissa relaxed slightly, clearly relieved he was not pushing the issue. It really was, she agreed. And now we have this to look forward to. Brett raised his wine glass. To our little miracle, he toasted, watching as Marissa took a sip of her water. The web of lies was growing more tangled by the day. Soon, very soon, Brett would be ready to tear it all down. The next day at school, Brett threw himself into his new role as drama club advisor with gusto. He sat in on rehearsals, offering suggestions and praise in equal measure. He helped with costumes and set design, always making sure to defer to Nelson's expertise. It was sickening, really, how easily Nelson fell for the act. The man preened under Brett's attention, clearly thrilled to have another admirer in his orbit. Poor fool. He had no idea the storm that was coming for him. You know, Brett, Nelson said one afternoon as they worked to dismantle the set after rehearsal. I have to admit, I had my doubts when you first volunteered. I did not really peg you as the theatrical type, but you have been a godsend. Brett smiled, though the expression did not quite reach his eyes. Happy to help. It has been enlightening. Enlightening, indeed. In the weeks since joining the drama club, Brett had gathered a wealth of information. He had overheard hushed phone conversations between Nelson and Marissa, watched as they exchanged meaningful glances across crowded hallways. But it was not enough. Not nearly enough. He needed something concrete, something that would force the school board's hand. The opportunity presented itself in the form of Amber Catton, a junior with stars in her eyes and a crush on Nelson a mile wide. Brett observed as Nelson lavished attention on the girl, offering private coaching sessions and gushing praise for her mediocre performances. It was all very above board, of course. Nelson was too smart to actually cross the line. But perception was everything. It took some doing, but Brett eventually convinced Amber's mother to file a complaint. Nothing too salacious, just concerns about the amount of time her daughter was spending alone with Mr. Haley, about the way he seemed to favor her over other students. The complaint landed on the principal's desk on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the school board had launched a full investigation into Nelson's conduct. Brett watched from the sidelines as Nelson's carefully constructed world began to crumble. The man was a nervous wreck, jumping at shadows, snapping at students. Good, Brett thought. Let him suffer. Let him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, very soon, Brett would have everything he needed to bring Marissa's house of lies crashing down around her. Are you sure about this? Marissa asked, worry creasing her brow. A whole month in D.C.? What about your classes? Brett zipped up his suitcase, forcing a reassuring smile. It is a great opportunity, honey. The school has already arranged for a long-term substitute. And think how good it will look for my tenure review. Marissa nodded, but the concern did not leave her eyes. I will miss you. For a moment, Brett almost faltered, almost believed the sincerity in her voice. But then he remembered the hushed phone calls, the secret smiles exchanged with Nelson in the hallways. I will miss you too, he lied smoothly. But it will fly by, you will see. And when I get back, we can really start preparing for the baby. Marissa's hand flew to her stomach, guilt flashing across her face. Right, she murmured. The baby. Brett kissed her cheek, grabbed his bags, and headed out the door. But instead of driving to the airport, he made his way across town to a nondescript apartment complex. The place was small, sparsely furnished, but it would do for the next month. This would be his base of operations. Brett set up his laptop, connecting to the feed from the hidden cameras he had installed throughout the house. Then he settled in to watch and wait. It did not take long for Marissa to take advantage of his absence. The very next day, Nelson's car pulled into their driveway just after sunset. Brett watched, while rising in his throat, as Marissa welcomed her lover into their home, into their bed. Over the next few weeks, Brett meticulously documented every encounter, every hushed phone call, every secret rendezvous. He compiled financial records, tracked suspicious transactions, and built a case so airtight a seasoned prosecutor would weep with joy. And then, when he was sure he had everything he needed, Brett made his final move. It was child's play to track down Nelson's wife, Faith Haley, a well-respected pediatrician. Her office was just a few miles from the high school. Brett felt a twinge of guilt as he prepared the envelope. She was an innocent in all this. But he squashed the feeling ruthlessly. Collateral damage was unavoidable in war. The package he sent contained irrefutable evidence of Nelson's affair, photos, video stills, transcripts of damning conversations. He included a brief, anonymous note expressing sympathy and suggesting she seek legal counsel. Then, Brett sat back and waited. He did not have to wait long. The next day, his burner phone lit up with a text from the neighbor he had enlisted to keep an eye on the house. Police just left. Your wife looked upset. Brett allowed himself a small smile. Phase 1 complete. A few hours later, another text came through. This one from the fake email account he had set up to communicate with the bank's fraud department. Accounts frozen pending investigation. Further action may be necessary. Perfect. The noose was tightening. Brett gave it another day before making his next move. He called Marissa, making sure to sound appropriately concerned. Honey, is everything okay? Mrs. Abney next door said she saw police at the house yesterday. Marissa's voice was strained, on the edge of panic. Brett, I need you to come home. Something has happened. I cannot explain over the phone. Brett feigned confusion. What? Marissa, you are scaring me. What is going on? Please, she begged. Just come home. I will explain everything. I promise. Brett hung up, satisfaction settling over him. The endgame was approaching. Soon, very soon, he would have his revenge. As he packed up his temporary living space, Brett allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought of the life he had planned with Marissa, the family they were supposed to have. All of it, gone in an instant. But from the ashes of that dream, a new Brett had risen. Harder, colder, smarter. Marissa and Nelson had no idea what was coming for them, but they were about to find out. Brett's key turned in the lock. The familiar sound now carried a weight of finality. He stepped into the house he had once called home, bracing himself for the performance of a lifetime. Marissa sat at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. Red-rimmed eyes darted up to meet his, a mixture of relief and fear flickering in her gaze. "Brett," she breathed, rushing to embrace him. "Oh God, I am so glad you're home." He allowed himself to be enveloped in her arms, noting the slight swell of her stomach pressed against him. The child that should have been his miracle. Now, just another lie. "What is going on, Marissa?" Brett asked, injecting just the right amount of concern into his voice. "I got your message. Are you okay? Is it the baby?" Marissa pulled back, wringing her hands. No. The baby is fine. It is everything else." Brett listened, nodded at all the right moments, his face a mask of growing concern. He had anticipated this moment for weeks, planned out every word, every reaction. Now, it was time to spring the trap. The house was just the beginning. Soon, Marissa would lose everything, just as he had. In a tastefully decorated office, another scene was unfolding. Faith Haley, a respected pediatrician and wife of Nelson Haley, sat across from her lawyer, a manila envelope clutched in her white-knuckled hands. "Are you sure about this, Faith?" the lawyer asked gently. "Once we file, there is no going back." Faith nodded, her jaw set in determination. "I am sure," she said. "I want him out of my life, out of my children's lives." The lawyer nodded, pulling out the necessary forms. "All right then, let's begin the process of filing for divorce. We will cite adultery as the grounds, naming Marissa Hess as the other woman." As Faith began filling out the paperwork, her hand shook slightly, but her resolve never wavered. Nelson had made his choice. Now, he would face the consequences. Nelson sat in the principal's office, his usual charm nowhere to be found as he faced the stern-faced members of the school board. "Mr. Haley," the superintendent began, "I hope you understand the seriousness of these allegations." Nelson nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. "Of course," he stammered, "but I assure you, it is all a misunderstanding. I would never save it." The principal cut him off. "We have received multiple complaints about your conduct, Mr. Haley. Inappropriate behavior with students, misuse of school resources, the list goes on." Nelson's face paled. But that is not true. I have always been professional. We have no choice but to suspend you pending a full investigation," the superintendent continued, as if Nelson had not spoken. "Please turn in your keys and school ID. You are not to set foot on campus or contact any students until this matter is resolved. Do you understand?" Nelson nodded numbly, his world crumbling around him. As he stumbled out of the office, he pulled out his phone, desperately scrolling to Marissa's number. The call went straight to voicemail. Nelson was alone. The for sale sign stood stark against the manicured lawn, a tangible symbol of dreams destroyed. Brett watched from the window as a young couple toured the property, Jim the realtor gesturing enthusiastically. "They seem nice," Marissa said softly, coming to stand beside him. "Do you think they will make an offer?" Brett nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "Jim thinks so. He said they fell in love with the place as soon as they saw it." Marissa's hand drifted to her growing belly, a gesture that no longer inspired joy in Brett, only a dull ache of betrayal. "It is a good home," she murmured. "I hope they will be happy here." Brett turned to face her, steeling himself for what came next. "Marissa, we need to talk." She looked up, brow furrowing at his serious tone. "What is it? Did something else happen with the bank?" "No, nothing like that." Brett took a deep breath. "I know, Marissa. About everything." Marissa's face went pale. What do you mean?" In response, Brett pulled out his phone, queuing up one of the damning videos he had captured. Marissa's voice filled the room, discussing her affair with Nelson in excruciating detail. She stumbled back, horror dawning on her face. "Brett, I can explain, do not." Brett's voice was ice. "Do not insult me with more lies." He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase, sliding it across the kitchen table. "Divorce papers. I am citing adultery and financial fraud," he stated. Marissa's hands shook as she opened the envelope. "Brett, please," she begged. "We can work this out. I will end things with Nelson, I swear. We can raise this baby together. Be a family. That is not my child, Marissa." Brett's voice was calm, emotionless. "And you are not the woman I married. The woman I loved. Tears streamed down Marissa's face. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt you. Please, Brett, give me another chance. I will do anything." For a moment, Brett almost wavered. The pain in Marissa's eyes was real. Her remorse seemed genuine. But then he remembered the overheard phone calls, the secret smiles exchanged with Nelson, the utter betrayal of everything they had built together. "It is too late," he said quietly. "I have already sold the house." Marissa's head snapped up. "What? But we just put it on the market. How could you?" "Jim has been working on it for weeks," Brett explained. "The couple outside? They're here to sign the final paperwork." Marissa's voice was faint. "Weeks? You have been planning this for weeks?" Brett nodded. "Ever since I found out about your affair. About the baby." Marissa sank into a chair, her world crumbling around her. Where am I supposed to go? That is not my problem anymore." Brett's voice was devoid of emotion. "I suggest you call Nelson. I am sure he would be happy to take you in." He smirked. "Oh wait," he added, his voice laced with cruel amusement. "He cannot. He has been suspended, pending an investigation into his conduct at school. Someone filed a complaint about inappropriate behavior with students." Marissa's eyes widened in realization. You did this." Brett shrugged. "You made your choices, Marissa. Now you get to live with the consequences." He picked up a suitcase already packed and waiting by the door. "I am leaving for California next month. I have accepted a position at a private school in San Francisco." "California?" Marissa echoed, her voice hollow. "You are moving across the country?" "Fresh start," Brett said simply. "Something we both need, I think." He paused at the door, looking back at the woman he had once loved more than life itself. "Goodbye, Marissa." He held her gaze. "I hope it was worth it." With that, Brett walked out, leaving Marissa alone in the empty shell of their former life. Miles away, in a sun-drenched classroom, Brett Hess stood before a group of eager students. "All right, everyone," he began, a genuine smile on his face. "Let's talk about the Civil War. Who can tell me about the economic factors that led to this pivotal moment in American history?" As hands shot up around the room, Brett felt a sense of peace settle over him. The betrayal, the pain, the elaborate revenge. It all seemed like a distant memory now. He had survived the storm and emerged stronger on the other side.